Thanks for staying with Newsnight. Judgment has been reserved in the social grant case in the Supreme Court of Appeal. Social grant recipients continue to complain. This is about the deductions that are being made from their payments. Many say they're left with only half their money each month. Black Sash and the Social Security Agency want the Supreme Court of Appeal to stop Net1 from making these deductions. eNCA's Erin Bates has been tracking that story for us. Erin, it was quite surprising because even the first time that the issue of contracts came before the Constitutional Court, SASSA had been fighting Net1 over these deductions, but they still fought to keep them as a service provider anyway. But that being besides the case, how much progress was made today in the Supreme Court of Appeal?
Well, I have to say, going through what was happening in the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein, it's as though it's not even muddied waters, it's just mud. And some of the counsel that I spoke to over the phone, just to try and get some clarity, also seemed confused. But at its bare bones, what SASSA wants is for the Supreme Court of Appeal to allow it to appeal a judgment from the High Court, basically saying that Net1 and subsidiaries that make deductions can do so from the old white SASSA Grindrod cards. And those are the cards that are being phased out. So one of the considerations of the Supreme Court of Appeal is whether it should even hear this case when those are the cards that are being phased out, hopefully by the end of the year.
So as it stands, do we have figures in terms of how many people are still being affected by these deductions? And why is Net1 continuing with them when I think part of the Constitutional Court, their ruling also made it very clear that a SASSA grant money is not to be deducted?
Well, in this case, it certainly seems that different counsel for the different parties, which includes Net1, SASSA and the Black Sash, agree that there are problems around deductions from social grant beneficiaries' social grants. But we must remember this is chiefly about those old SASSA Grindrod cards. In terms of progress, things haven't gotten anywhere. Really, the judgment has been reserved, and we're going to have to wait and hear what the SCA says around entertaining this application. But in terms of the social grant deductions, it really boils down to whether or not social grant beneficiaries have a relationship directly with Grindrod Bank, which is the administrator really for the old SASSA Grindrod cards, or whether SASSA can intervene and say, hold up a minute, we want to stop the kind of deductions that have been happening because we're really the overseer of all of these social grant beneficiary accounts which are with the Grindrod Bank. And it's all very complicated kind of legalese and banking arguments and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it's up to the SCA to decide, are they going to entertain this application or not? And do they have a role to play in determining the nature of this relationship? Is it something that's up to them in law, or is it for another branch of maybe government, for example?
In the next 3 months, as this handover and the phasing out process takes place and it's expected to be completed, does this argument become moot?
Well, that's exactly what was before the court today, Cathy. Your legal mind is absolutely on point because that's what some of the parties were arguing. Firstly, these old cards are being phased out. Secondly, the private bank accounts that some people have moved to have different terms of agreement. So whether or not they agree to have deductions is kind of their call as clients of private banks. And then the new in-phased SASSA SAPO card with the post office doesn't allow for any deductions. So really, what's the point of this whole case? How much legwork can we get through between now and the end of the year? And that's something that the judges are going to have to decide. But they really were asking the same thing, kind of what's our role here? What legroom do we have when these cards are being phased out?
An indication, generally when the Supreme Court of Appeal reserves judgment, it can take anything between a day and a few months. So do they give any indication of when they expect this matter to be back in court?
No indication from court, but from some of the lawyers I've been speaking to, they're estimating around 3 or 4 weeks before we should have an answer from the SCA. And just to come back, I don't think I answered your question clearly on the numbers involved here. What we know now is that there are around 12.5 million social grant beneficiaries, which is up from the 11 million we had last year. And from what the spokesperson from SASSA said to me this afternoon, we're still at around 17 million social grants. So some individuals have multiple social grants on their one kind of profile. But in terms of how many people are still on the old SASSA Grindrod cards, we don't know.
All right. Well, that's where we leave it for tonight. Erin Bates will keep tracking that particular story for us.